Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of our Empowering Resilience Severe Weather webinar series. Today's event is focused on tornadoes. My name is Hannah Meeks, and I'm a marketing manager in the public safety sector here at Everbridge. I'll be facilitating parts of this session. Before we jump in, I have just a few housekeeping items to cover. All webinars are recorded, so you can catch up or revisit later, and a link to the recording of this session will be sent in the next week. If you have any questions that aren't addressed during the webinar, feel free to email them to me at hannah.meeks@everbridge.com, and this information can also be found in the email that you received from GoToWebinar. This entire series is focused on communication and collaboration during severe weather events. For today's session, we'll have a panel to discuss preparing for and responding to tornadoes from an emergency management perspective. Please ask questions throughout the discussion by typing them into the question pane located in the control panel. We'll answer as many questions as time permits at the end of the live discussion. If we aren't able to get to your question, we'll have someone follow up with you after. With that, I'm happy to introduce our panelists, Sarah Russell and Jim Coker, as well as our moderator, Mark McGovern. Sarah was promoted to Commissioner of Emergency Management for the City of St. Louis in May 2021. Sarah is a member of the International Association of Emergency Managers, the International Public Safety Association, Government Social Media Organization, and the National Information Officers Association. Jim was appointed director of the Jefferson County Emergency Management Agency in September 2014. He's a member of the Alabama Association of Emergency Managers and the FBI National Academy Association. Mark is currently a sales engineering manager and leads a team of solution consultants for Everbridge. Prior to his current role, Mark worked to roll out critical event management solutions to government, healthcare, and corporate customers. Mark, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Hannah. Well, we had a fun 30 minutes getting ready for this. Thanks for your patience, Jim and Sarah. I'm not sure, been doing this for a long time, never had so many technical issues ever, really. So hopefully that was all the way, will be smooth sailing. So as we know, I had the opportunity to chat with both Jim and Sarah last week briefly, and just in the 20 minutes I talked to them, I learned so much about tornado preparedness from the real deals here. So why don't we go back and just learn a little bit more about your background? You know, obviously Hannah gave kind of a high level, but Sarah, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit more about how you got here.
Sure. So I joined the City of St. Louis Emergency Management Agency back in 2010 as a program specialist. You know, as with many small emergency management agencies, I was told up front I'd probably never get promoted. And here I am 13 years later, about to hit year 2 of being the commissioner. So definitely don't listen to them when they say there's no chance. So throughout that time, we've had a number of special events, a number of incidents that I've been able to be part of, planning exercises and, you know, seeing the way that emergency management has evolved, as well as mass notification and public warning as well. So I'm just happy to be here and share the time with you all to discuss tornadoes.
Well, again, congratulations on your promotion, and just stick to itness, and we're happy to have you here. So Jim, tell us some more about yourself.
It's almost hard to figure out where to start, because I hear Sarah and I'm going, good job, Sarah. That's great. Actually, I started with an interest in tornadoes in high school in 1974, which does tell you I've been around for a little bit. That was the year we had the super outbreak of tornadoes that hit much of this country. And I was a member of a Red Cross high school disaster team, and we were deployed to the field as 16-year-olds with brand new driver's licenses. To drive vans, haul materials, actually go out and help look for victims and so on. So I developed my initial interest there, never lost it. I became a police officer in 1979. And in 1979, our only tornado warning system that we had was to ride around town with your siren on, because you couldn't see anything, you didn't know anymore, you just hoped you didn't get hit. And you rode around with your siren on until you were all finished. So we have, to echo what Sarah said, we have really come a long way since then. 35 years in law enforcement. I was a member of the Alabama State Incident Management Team, so we got to deploy around the country. I've done a lot of different things in my career, and I'm still trying to figure out what I'm gonna do when I grow up, I guess. But I'm honored today and appreciate being part of the panel.
Fantastic. Well, let's get right into it then. So thanks for that background from both of you. But we'll start with Jim. So what would you say are some of the most important mitigation tactics that you can do prior before the actual tornado warnings come out? What are some of the things that you really kind of look to do ahead of time to get ahead of it?
Well, the first thing is public education. Here in Jefferson County, we've got over 30 cities. We have 14 911 districts. We have 12 public school districts. Our largest city is the city of Birmingham. But we do have 35 cities and towns here, plus the unincorporated part of the county. So public education is always something that's at the forefront of our efforts. In Alabama, where we live, we are the most tornado-prone county in the state. We have a lot. We've had many since I've been here. So making sure that the public keeps this in their mind on beautiful blue sky days such as today, that's the most important part of preparedness.
Sure. Sarah, what were you doing heading into the weekend to prepare? I know you guys had some little bit of weather there over the weekend.
We did. So, we did get started right away, getting everybody up to speed and kind of leaning forward. So from an internal perspective, making sure everyone was ready to go. We had, some resources open. We did have a chat room open in case anybody wanted to jump in and kind of monitor. We also used kind of a bulletin board tool internally to put notes up on for people that are covering down on various things. So that was kind of how we positioned ourselves internally. And then absolutely externally, education does continue. We had an interesting occurrence surrounding sirens and a miscommunication about, we have some new light fixtures in the city that are smart fixtures, and they do look relatively similar to sirens, but they are not sirens. So, further examining the education piece of it is, repeatedly educating people throughout as, we started 2 years ago talking about these things and it popped up again. So that happens with communications all the time, and just making sure we stay fresh and continue to educate people.
Yeah, so I know when I worked with a lot of emergency managers, a lot of times it's all about those field events. You're at the fairs, you're at the, the carnivals, things like that. You're always doing mailers and things like that. Can you guys both speak to a little more, what you've had success with Facebook or TikTok or YouTube or videos on the public website? Do you think that's really driven adoption for people to sign up for the alerts? Because that's always a challenge.
Sarah, you want to start?
Sure. So we've had some opportunities to do some events out in the public. Of course, we had a flooding event in July, and that gave us a good opportunity to get in front of a number of people from the city. So being able to just meet people where they are, have a conversation, explain to them, what the tool does, how they can use it, and some of the benefits are, has really been valuable to us. As well as, finding different ways to get the information out when we're not face-to-face, as we did through COVID. So, we put in a little flyer in with the water and trash bill. And within a couple of different quarters of the year, we had pushed out information to our entire city. And that really kind of reinforced some of the other things we were doing on social media, outreach on Nextdoor, as well as some smart advertising kiosks that we have in the city. So, kind of hitting all of those. I even bought a billboard for a while. So, we pulled out kind of all the stops, and really, I think that, multi-tiered approach really helped us to reach people.
Fantastic billboard. I love it. Great way to think outside the box, as they say. Jim?
Mark, we, and I attribute this to our staff, but we use social media very aggressively. We put a lot of information out. I'm not the most adept at social media, but our staff is. And so to them, get the credit for everything that's going on there. Another thing that we did as the Alabama Association of Emergency Managers is we established a YouTube channel a couple of years ago, and then COVID kind of delayed what we want to do with that. But we want to put a lot of preparedness videos on our YouTube channel so that the public safety, anybody can go to that anytime they have a moment. And just like you're doing with the webinar today, be able to refresh yourself, learn new information, learn how to do something, and it's a mouse click away. So our folks are always trying to learn new methods to reach the public, and one good way to do that is to be a sponge and to just soak up all the information from other agencies and from the public.
So we went from driving around in a police car to Facebook and billboards, seems to be the lessons there. So pretty crazy times. We talked a little bit, I found it really interesting last week, and we chatted briefly. Start with you, Jim, about making sure that your staff feels comfortable they can focus on the task at hand and not being distracted about how their loved one's doing when they see this, they see the path heading towards, friends and family. What do you kind of do around that?
A lot of that has got to do with lead time. We all communicate very well with our families. Our families know what we do. And I think the lead time there speaks to the comfort zone that we have here. Because Sarah will attest to this, when you get busy, you get really busy. And just knowing that you've already discussed things with your family and your friends, they know what to do, they know when to do it, and they're tuned into the messaging that you're sending, that takes part of the burden off of the folks that are having to do the work during the event.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jim completely. I would add that, finding opportunities to do outreach internally to make sure that, just short of kind of volunteering everybody, right? Make sure you're ready at home. So pushing our messages of preparedness, finding those opportunities to maybe help along the way, whether it's, a small emergency kit as a incentive or annual giveaway to try and focus and encourage everybody to go home and make sure that they have a plan of preparedness to make their families more confident in these incidents that will make them feel more secure.
Fantastic. So we'll stay with you, Sarah. So kind of talked a little bit about the preparation, about letting the public know ahead of time, but okay, the first action steps. So we'll stay with you because you obviously had some, for those of you who don't know, there was a lot of tornado outbreaks in the St. Louis area this past weekend, so it's very fresh. So what were the first steps when you see the tornado watch issue? What does your team kind of do as they start stepping through that the manual, if you will?
Right. So by the time we get to a watch, we're already engaged. We work very closely with National Weather Service office here in St. Louis. So we've already kind of been having conversations for a day or more in a lot of cases, but we're in weather chat. We know that it's coming, and we're ready to push their message out on our Everbridge platform. We have it branded here. So for the city of St. Louis, we call it Notify STL. But we've encouraged people to use, download the Everbridge app, know that Everbridge is powering our tool, and then we're ready to push that message out, and then ready right behind it for any warning messages that may be coming down the pipeline as the system comes through.
On a side note, how was the surrounding areas? Anyone injured or was everyone safe?
I haven't heard really any updates about, any injuries on the storms as a whole. There were, I believe, 8 confirmed tornadoes in the area, none confirmed within the city of St. Louis, but that is quite a few. All were EF-0 or EF-1 tornadoes. There were some damages to structures, particularly south of here, west of here, and then also in Illinois, there were some structures that were destroyed on some farmland. Gotcha.
So we'll go to Jim. So what are some of the things you guys do to prepare once things actually start going rolling?
Well, we mirror what Sarah does too. Several days in advance, we're watching, we're talking to the National Weather Service. We're also up on NWS chat. Information flow and the solid relationship we have with our local office is always key. They're not afraid to answer our questions, and we're not afraid to ask. We try to urge them, can you speculate what time will this be here next Tuesday? No, they can't do that. But the up-to-date information, absolutely, we push that out. And then we take the information we receive, and we have got groups that are already built and templates to send information out to our mayors, our city councilors, our county commissioners, our public safety chiefs, school superintendents, and so on. Ultimately, it's between 600 and 800 decision makers, and they all get the same information. So that ends a lot of speculation. And then we encourage them to stay in touch with us. When we do go under a tornado watch, and Mark, I may be jumping the gun a little bit here, we will send the same group information out about a live Zoom call. And as soon as we go under a watch, we establish the Zoom call and we stay on the Zoom call until the watch is canceled. That way we have face-to-face discussion with the people that we just notified earlier.
I love it. That's fantastic. We talked about that last week. That's really fun. How many people you have on there at a max of the time? I mean, I'm sure it'll trickle down to the event to a few, but when it's really things are heating up, how many we have on there at once?
We've had well over 100 before. Middle of the night, you won't have as many. If school is not in session, if school's on spring break, you won't have as many. So timing and day of the week does have an impact on it. But we always have a very good crowd because now it's an expectation. And we'll get phone calls. If the watch has only been active for a couple of minutes, we'll get a call. What time is the Zoom call coming up?
Right.
As soon as we can click the button.
That's 100 people. That's a lot of barking dogs and little toddlers running around in the background, I'm sure. Always fun. So we'll go back to Sarah. We talked a little bit also last week about the methods of communication and being equitable and accessible for all. I know, obviously, different communities have different needs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, one of the benefits that we've always looked for in any communication tool is the capability of reaching, all segments of our audience, but also being able to reach as many people as possible. So we do use a layered approach, which I think is pretty common in emergency management. We do have a siren system. Ours is aging quite thoroughly, I'll say. And with that comes some issues, which we're still working through from this past weekend. And one of the reasons why we were able to get the buy-in from our leadership, we were using Nixle. And we were looking to expand to Everbridge for a number of years. And one of the ways that we really were able to accomplish that was by acknowledging that the sirens were aging and that we wanted to have something that, gave us another way of sending out many more hazard, notifications than just what we were using the siren system for. But also to have that, kind of redundancy to back up the siren system. But to be able to have a tool that would allow us to, have people choose where they wanted to receive the alerts, how they wanted to receive them, and to include landlines, which was important for some folks that haven't yet taken up a cell phone or a smartphone. And then also, with thinking about some of our other stakeholder groups, healthcare field, we found that there were still some care providers in the St. Louis area that really use fax machine to receive information from some of their partners at the city. So being able to have that as a capability is useful. And we like the redundancy of that and the way that it complements the other communication tools that we encourage people to use as well.
Yeah, I found that very interesting. Being in the technology field, we talk a lot here at Everbridge about people not having landlines here anymore, and how do you get a hold of the cell and tie that to an address. And I kind of forgot about the converse, that there are some older populations that don't have cell phones, and we want to make sure we certainly don't miss out on those. Jim, want to elaborate anything or add any more color?
I would. Like Sarah, we have a siren system here. Sarah, I can't wait to see the look on your face when I tell you how many we have. We have 255 sirens here. So this covers 1,100 square miles of Jefferson County. We're very hilly here. There are areas of the county where you cannot hear a siren because the sound is cut off by a hill. And so the siren system itself is inadequate. We had to have other options. Everbridge is our go-to option because it offers so many different ways to contact the public. When we message the public, when we go out and do all of our civic talks and so on, we call this having multiple tools in your toolbox, because everybody understands you've got a lot of different tools in your toolbox. So on bad weather days, on tornado warning days, we want you to have a lot of tools. And we have seen, not Everbridge, but we've seen other tools fail during tornado warnings. So we want you to have multiple ways.
Sure. Now, I'm here in Maryland, so we're not really a tornado-prone state. They're pretty rare. They're pretty small. So educate me. This might be an ignorant question. So with tornado sirens, is that like, as Sarah said, they're kind of aging? Do you actively replace them? Is there a path forward, like newer technology on the sirens, or is that kind of an old technology that's going away? What are your thoughts on that? 'Cause I honestly, I don't know.
Sarah,
Well,
have you ever had a squirrel take a siren out because it chewed on a wire?
I cannot recall that. No.
They are older technology, and the way that we replace ours is when we have sirens gifted to us from other counties who are getting rid of their system. They're very expensive. A lot of people still want to hear a siren, even though these are outdoor warning devices. And as buildings get better, as cars get better, and they're more soundproofed, I know I wouldn't stake my life to an outdoor siren. And again, that goes back to the educational process. But there are a lot of things that can cause a siren to fail to function. So when we, Sarah and myself, we're responsible for lives. So we're going to pick up every tool possible and use every tool possible to notify the public, because lives are at stake here.
That's right. And one thing that I'll add, and I've been saying this for several days again, is, if you look at the stories of people who have gone through tornadoes, and people say, well, what was it like? Many people say, well, it sounded like a freight train. It was super loud when it came through, and it was just kind of chaotic. So I'm asking people regularly now. We really talk about this as an outdoor warning siren system. It's not meant to be heard indoors. It's not meant to wake you up when you're asleep in the middle of the night and these things happen. And honestly, like, would you be able to hear it over a freight train? And that was a case, that we had on Saturday night. Not that just you couldn't hear it, but I think that there were a number of people that just couldn't hear the sirens as they usually do on a test day, and we're trying to hear for it. Now we have the problem of, the Midwest, of whenever you're telling people to go seek shelter, people want to go outside and look. So, we know that there were some people outdoors that didn't hear them. So we are having to look into that as well. But it's important to note that you may not be able to hear them, depending on when and how your home was constructed, soundproofed, your proximity to the siren, and a number of different factors that are come into play in that.
Great information. I'm going to put Jim on the spot because I was going to say,
I'd like to
Sarah.
add one more thing here too, Mark, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We'll talk in a little while about a tornado that hit us 2 years ago. And if you lose power, if the siren itself is damaged, you lose the ability to use that siren to warn the public. If that happens, and you have another storm coming up, or the storm is not over, it is no longer an asset to you. So being able to have, in this case, Everbridge, which will continue to function, again, that's life-saving. That's vital.
Well, I was going to kind of put you on the spot there, and that might be a good time to tell that story about using Everbridge in your multiple tools in your toolbox and living through a tornado. Is now a good time as any to kind of relay that story? And I'll start a little timer here.
Start your timer, please.
Go ahead.
Okay, in January of 2021, this county was the only county in the state of Alabama to get hit by a tornado. We had the only storm in the entire state. And we are the most tornado-prone county in the state, going back to 1950. We've had everything from F-0s to EF-5s here. We've had significant loss of life over the last several decades here. A lot of this is related to our topography, the hills that I spoke about. So on this particular January night, and this was at 10:30 at night, we had one single storm, and it devastated a city named the city of Fultondale here, which is just north of the city of Birmingham. So our staff was in because we were watching the storm, and this was a very, very quickly developing tornado. And again, think about the problems that are unique to having tornado warnings at night. Sarah mentioned, can you hear outdoor warning sirens? if you're at home, if you're in bed, if you're asleep, you probably won't hear them. If it's windy, you probably won't hear a siren. So having ways to reach the public in the middle of the night, that's critical. So on this particular night, this storm, I was here with some of our staff, and we're watching the radar, and there's no tornado on the radar. The next sweep, it's like, what's that is developing? And within the next sweep or so, we have a tornado on the ground. The tornado crossed an interstate. It dropped major power lines on the interstate. So that in itself removed one of the ways responders could get to it. You didn't have a lot of time that night to seek shelter. And that's a key point. You didn't have a lot of time. So one thing that we all do as emergency managers, one of our goals is to give you as much possible time to make a decision that may save your life and your family's life. So as soon as the tornado warning was issued, Everbridge alerted contacts on the polygon. If I recall, it was around 60,000 contacts. The polygon was later extended. The sirens did activate, but they don't activate as quickly as an Everbridge notification goes out. And something else that a lot of people forget about is the siren, at least the ones we have, they rotate. So if it's not pointing at you, it still has to rotate all the way around before it's pointing at you, before you may hear it. And that did happen that night. There was another unique incident that night involving weather warnings. There was a computer glitch at a computer in Washington, D.C. So WIA did not work and the weather radios did not function. So when we talk about having multiple tools in your toolbox, this is why. Because your lives may depend on it. So we did have loss of life that night. We did have injuries. It could have been a lot worse. We got lucky. This was an EF-3 tornado.
Wow.
And,
Sorry. Sarah, Jim had mentioned weather radios. Is that something that is in the city of St. Louis is popular? I would guess not so much, or is it actually still?
We talk about it a lot. Again, through our partnership with our weather service office, that is something that we do encourage people to have as well. I like to compare it to, or kind of set it up to be like a best friend to a smoke detector, a carbon monoxide detector. And we try to remind people with every time change to change the batteries in your weather radio as well as those other devices, to really kind of drive it home that it can be just as life-saving as those other tools can be, and it should be one of those in every home type of situation. Have one in the office. I know a number of our public libraries, if not all of them, had them at one point. And it kind of comes and goes a little bit, once something happens, sometimes it'll pop up that weather radios are, kind of in style again, I'll say. And that's another way that, technology has really helped out, because I know when I was a kid and in kind of like the 70s and the 80s, and people would have them, and the technology wasn't the same. So people would start getting warnings for places that weren't near their home. They would unplug it, take the batteries out, chuck it in the basement or the closet, and it was done. And now with that technology that we can program in the code for our municipality, and I'm not getting alerts for everything around us unless I want it, that really makes it a more appropriate tool for people, something that they're more accepting of, keeping it plugged in, keeping it out, and making sure that it's ready to go whenever it needs to alert you.
I had no idea that you could program like that. That's pretty interesting. But how long ago did that technology come out? Any idea?
It was at least 2010 when I started, so it's been around since I started talking about it all the time.
Gotcha. All right, we'll go back to Jim. So Jim, we'll move right along here. So how has having a notification system made your community more resilient to tornadoes?
Well, we talk about it all the time, continuously, and because we have had so many tornado events here, one thing that I like to do, even if I'm in a grocery store and I'm in the checkout line, I will talk to the person that's helping me. How do you get your alerts? What do you do? Well, I get mine from Everbridge. That just makes me feel good. And, you know, does your family know about this? Yes, I tell my family. So continuing to grow the messaging and to grow just across the entire county, how to get this accomplished is something we never quit doing. And with this many different cities, we have a large city, the city of Birmingham. Our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, is actually in their basement of City Hall. So we work with them very closely. We have not had a meeting with the city of Birmingham since yesterday afternoon to talk about preparedness. So less than 24 hours ago. And then we have the very small communities in the small cities. And those people maybe in the rural areas of the county. And we seem to have some tracks through the county where we have tornadoes just repeat over and over and over through the years. So those people are getting more and more educated.
Sure. And just looking at the clock here, so that's just shy of 8 minutes. You might want to speak to that, about that being the time frame from first getting alerting around that that terrible event in your county.
Okay, I asked Mark to start a timer, and the timer was for 8 minutes. So over the last 8 minutes, that was all of the time that the people of the city of Fultondale had to wake up, to realize there was a tornado warning, to determine what they were going to do, because in 8 minutes, you don't have time to get in your car and go to a community storm shelter. And they had 3 at the time in the city of Fultondale, but you don't have time to get up and go because now you're in the path of the storm. So the reason we use 8 minutes often, that's not a benchmark. That just happened to be the time in this particular storm. But in the middle of the night, when you only have 8 minutes to keep your family safe, you know, you need to think about your plans ahead of a storm. What am I going to do if it's the middle of the night? And we've seen a lot of people just kind of wake up when they hear the 8 minute mark, the alarm go off. It's like, man, that's not a lot of time. It is not. I don't even know if I can find my car keys in 8 minutes. You know, so,
I know I can't.
How do I get to the center of the house, or how do I get to the basement of the safest place?
You mentioned something else last week when we chatted about safe spaces. I guess those are, and I might be getting the terminology incorrect about if there's a solid brick building. I think you nicknamed it the 3 little pigs. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Alabama now a couple of years ago passed a new law. It's called Safer Places, and it took about a year to get all the procedures put together, and we'll be glad to share. If you want to email us or email you, we'll share the Alabama law and the procedures with you. But it's a realization that there can never be enough money ever to build enough community storm shelters to serve your entire jurisdiction. You just can't do it. So what the state of Alabama has done is establish the Safer Places program. And we call it the 3 little pigs law, I guess, because when we talk, especially when we talk to children, they've heard the story. The big bad wolf, that's the tornado. My house of bricks is stronger than your house of straw. So this is not for residential structures, but if you have an office building, if you have a church with a community room that may be underground, you can now allow people to come into your pre-designated safer place and seek shelter from the storm. Again, this is to fill that big void that we have because there will never be enough community storm shelters.
Sure, that's amazing. And you mentioned, never enough funding for all the shelters. So Sarah, do you want to talk about, a little bit about any suggestions for obtaining and getting funding for systems and, dealing with the local politicians to make sure it's always forefront of mind to get budget for these are very important, items, agenda items?
Sure. I definitely have experience. I spent 10 years trying to get funding for us to upgrade from our free Nixle platform to our paid Everbridge platform. And that was a lot of legwork on my part. It was a lot of me, unfortunately, kind of, feeling like I was leading on sales manager after sales manager, but, really trying to put in the effort with, our leadership to the benefits of why we needed a tool like this. And we finally got to the point, we had conversations and some understood and some were a little, like, well, we've got the sirens, we've got this and that, we've got the free thing. Why are we going to put more money behind it? And, we started reaching out to them much more frequently every time there was an incident somewhere else, and pointing out, this is what our limitations would be if this happened here. And really just kind of hammering them time and again when these major things were happening in other parts of the country and other parts of the state, and really pointing it out and kind of selling it that way, along with how it would fit into our program, and what kind of an asset it would be, especially as we start to, kind of re-examine and evaluate things like the outdoor warning siren system, and really just kind of sold it to them in the end. It really, kind of wasn't a question anymore. It's like, yeah, we need to do that. And then finally, we got to them enough that they made it a priority, and here we are. So I will say, that 10 years of work, the payoff was being able to, write the press release and put it out to the city and have all these opportunities to, give them information about it, have them sign up, help them sign up. And everywhere I go that I get to talk to people, whether it's a business or a resident, to say, well, we've got this. Are you aware of it? And to help them get on board to receive those messages. It's been huge. That was definitely one of the highlights of my job ever, was to be able to say, hey, we got it finally.
Right. That's got to be very, very gratifying and satisfying. Fantastic. So I want to make sure that we have a lot of people here, that we leave time for Hannah to go through some of the questions and get this answered from you guys. But before we go to the questions with Hannah, I wanted to see, is there anything else that I maybe missed or you wanted to add that I'm zoning out on? Anything that we wanted to chat about that you wanted to add before we go to the questions, Jim or Sarah?
I think we kind of touched about, using the tool for internal notifications as well. And that's something that we're still working to grow here in St. Louis. Unfortunately, the program manager who was, helping to build the product, within the city of St. Louis, is now the commissioner and the boss of it. So it's taken a little bit slower course than I would have preferred. But being able to have that capability so that not only can we talk to our city command staff, but we also have some other more regional groups that we work with. For example, I know that our health partners have a public information officers group, looking for those regional opportunities for us to be able to engage and have that capability. Our St. Louis Medical Operations Center uses Everbridge to issue notifications through that group. And I think that there's a lot of other regional opportunities that we can explore to make sure that we are all staying connected. And we do have a lot of other organizations in the city of St. Louis and the St. Louis metro area that do use Everbridge. So, it's something that people are familiar with. And as we kind of, start to work together, I think it helps us not only from a familiarity standpoint, but as I've talked many times about, as a city, it helps us when the messages that we're pushing out to our community are easily identifiable. They look the same. They have that continuity. It makes it harder for somebody to come in and try and disrupt that or imitate that and try to scam people, or trick them or misinform them in one way or another. So I always like to talk about that. I do have a degree in marketing, so branding is everything. And the more that we can kind of consolidate and make this look official, this is coming from the city of St. Louis, that reduces our risk of someone trying to do something bad.
Actually, that's a great topic. Thanks for bringing that up. And I remember several years ago when I did a lot of deployments and training for customers, we would talk a lot about branding and the look and the consistency. So whether there's an internal message or whether there's an external message that had to look a certain way, or whether we want to make an emergency versus a high priority emergency and things like that. So that is a really good topic. Jim, I think also just kind of piggybacking on Sarah, you mentioned earlier about trees down and first responders not being able to get to a site. I think, didn't you say you also used the messaging platform to possibly tell people that this is the right, that these roads are closed and here's a better way to get to the areas that need assistance? Am I remembering that wrong?
No, every storm we learn something. We learn another way to use the tools that we have. And in this case, because we have basically married Everbridge into everything else that we do, such as a Zoom call. When we receive information, then we can push that back out to the public using social media. We receive social media messaging. And Sarah, I don't know how it is in St. Louis, but we don't get a lot of phone calls anymore for damage. We typically will find them in social media. So we have someone assigned to monitor social media during an event, and that's how we get a lot of our damage reports. So we can then use the messaging platform to get this information back out to groups such as our public works, our roads and transportation crews. So in effect, this has become a dispatch tool. It also goes out to the 911 centers. And so we try to push information far and wide.
Anything else you want to add before we go to Hannah and some questions? All right, Hannah, you still there? You got some questions queued up from the audience?
Yes. I did, before we get started on that, I did want to just follow up to that last question that you asked, because I think one thing that Jim mentioned last week that we hadn't talked about was the importance of including legislators and elected officials on the alerts. So they have that visibility and awareness, and they see how often the tool is being used. So that, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that briefly as far as that being important for keeping funding.
You know, Sarah mentioned a while ago that she spent years seeking funding. We always are seeking funding. And one way to influence the type of funding you get is to keep our elected officials in the loop. In some cases, they may actually be the people in the polygon. If not, they're going to talk about the event afterwards. And just keeping them in the loop, not only for this is what happened, but letting them know ahead of time the preparations that are being made are critical, because these things come back up when you do go ask for assistance with the funding.
Okay, perfect. The first question that we got was, do either of you have experience with Everbridge's add-on tool to expand messaging in a threat to life scenario? So I think what they're referring to here is resident connection. I'm not sure if either one of you use that, but that's the access to the National Life Safety Database, or you can kind of override the opt-ins and send a message to more people if there's an imminent threat to life situation. Do either of you have experience with that?
So I'm pretty sure that I do, and I'm pretty sure we use that Saturday multiple times. So you know, I've kind of been managing the the aftermath of the storms that we had on Saturday, and in the immediate aftermath was all of these people saying, all right, you know, enough with the text messages and the calls. And honestly, you know, I'm kind of in the sorry not sorry camp. You know, I'm sorry you're tired of hearing my voice, but I'm glad that you're hearing my voice. So we have it set up so that we're issuing tornado warnings. You know, we're doing call downs using that publicly accessed data. So when we use Nixle for 10 years, and you know, we did a lot of these same efforts that we did with Everbridge. But in those 10 years of getting people used to a tool like this, we gathered about 17,000 people who had opted in to receive text or emails. And in the grand scheme, you know, our population is about 300,000 in the city of St. Louis. That was not a huge segment of the population. Now, when we, you know, made the jump to Everbridge and we had this publicly sourced data and we're able to push phone calls out, you know, now we're over 224,000 connects, you know, or contacts in our database. So on a night like Saturday night, when we had multiple tornado warnings, you know, it's really critical incident coming through the city, using that technology was really important. We know that we were able to reach a large number of people, whether it was their landline phones. Some people kind of got caught by surprise, like, I still have a landline, you know, or look at the city's warning me in this way as well. You know, and now just being able to talk about it and say, okay, explaining the way that we have the system set up and why they got the number of calls and text messages that they did get. So we had 2 separate tornado warnings within the span of an hour. And then one of those, well, between 2 of those, both of those warnings, they were updated or continued like 5 times. So we've got it set up so that, you know, you initiate a new message each time that that's updated. And that may be something that we look at and discuss changing. I don't know that we'll change it or not at this point, because we did have such an active threat. You know, I think it helped us, but we have to balance that with, are we just annoying people or are they going to opt out? So we don't want them to opt out, but we want them to see this is a critical incident. That's why you're getting these messages.
Right. Yeah. And I think just to clarify with that particular add-on tool, you don't have to worry about people opting out or opting in, because it's a life safety database. So the only time that information can be used is in that imminent threat to life situation. So you don't really have to worry about the opt-ins there, but you do if you're reaching people through they're opting into your mass notification system.
If I may add a couple of things here. One, not everybody on the call may understand exactly what a contact is. Mark, do you still have a residential line?
I do not.
You do not. Okay. For the purposes of this conversation, Mark has a residential line. Well, that would be one contact. Your residential line would be one contact. How many people are in your house at the particular time of the storm? You may have 2, you may have a dozen. So we say that we have notified a contact, but we have notified many more people than we can actually see. You know, family groups, you may only have one contact at the family group location, but you may be notifying many people who are then calling their family and friends. So that's important. It is important. And our senior citizens, as Sarah mentioned, it did surprise me to find out how many people still have landlines, and they still get their warnings from landlines. And I've told this story before. I had an uncle who's now gone, and when he would get the warnings over his landline, he would call me back right away. And he would say, "Thank you so much for having that nice lady call me and tell me about the tornado." Well, you know, she was a recording, but he got the message and he took immediate action. So we can't forget about any segment of our population at all.
Absolutely. Another question we got was, speaking of communication, as a company that conducts outreach to employees impacted by tornadoes, we normally use the National Weather Service to confirm touchdowns and use social media for damage reports and additional touchdowns. Although the damage from every tornado is different, are there best practices for an outreach zone, or who should or should not be reached out to after a tornado happens? Either of
I
you
think
have?
that from our perspective, you know, as long as we can validate the information, you know, we're willing to take damage reports from anyone. You know, certainly amateur radio volunteers, people who have taken the storm spotter training through the National Weather Service, you know, anybody that's come through classes that we may have put on, or people that, you know, are able to share, you know, photos and video. You know, we try to encourage people to do that in a safe manner, particularly following a storm, and not necessarily during. But, you know, more and more I see, you know, kind of photo as a hobby for me, but people that are interested in photography and using their skills, you know, number one, when the storm is approaching and you get the cool, you know, cloud and storm front photos, but continue that afterwards. You know, and some of our media partners and the media photographers that share their photos as quickly as they can following the incident, being able to collect information from them too, as well as reports that come in through NWS chat, which we know, and we're always careful. Our media partners like to read those directly on the air. But, you know, those are all good sources of us, ground reports from law enforcement, from fire and EMS and other crews that are on the ground that can report in internally is important also.
And to add to that, and I agree totally with Sarah here, because the reports that we get, we'll put in WebEOC, we'll put in NWS chat, and that helps our local National Weather Service office determine where they've got to go survey for damage. So every report is critical. They're all critical.
Okay. Another question we have is, for your tornado weather notifications, what source do you use to gather the best live information? Do you rely primarily on the National Weather Service, or is there anywhere else that you get that?
It's typically NWS for us for the most part.
Same here.
Okay.
Same here.
Easy enough. Another question is, do you guys have any best practice recommendations for communicating with members of your community who are non-native English speakers?
Okay, that is a capability that we are currently exploring right now, because in the tornado 2 years ago, we did have a community that was hit on the edge of Fultondale, and the residents there spoke Spanish. So we are working with a lot of our community partners, churches, to try to continue to develop our capability here.
Yeah, and for the city of St. Louis, we have a great institute within the city of St. Louis called the International Institute of St. Louis, and they work with all of the different. We've got a lot of immigrant populations. We've got people that have come in recently in the past couple of years from Afghanistan, Ukraine, and they offer a lot of educational opportunities and assistance to these populations when they come in to settle in the St. Louis area. So being able to, have conversations with that institute and potentially share information, but also, have them kind of assist us with making sure that, not only are we using the correct languages that are most used in the city of St. Louis, but we're also looking at the correct dialect, which can be very important. The city of St. Louis for a long time had or still has the second greatest population of Bosnians outside of Bosnia. And that is, something that we're all very mindful of is these other communities within our city. Our city is relatively small. We're 62 square miles, 300,000 people, but we are fortunate that we're comprised of all of these different cultural groups, and so that we, are able to leverage our partnerships and those populations. Key people within the community, not necessarily an elected official, but someone who really holds that type of trust and status within those individual segments of the population, and being able to connect with them. And we see them sometimes sharing our messaging that goes out. A lot of times, we do push, whenever we push out our Notify STL or Everbridge messaging, we push it to Twitter as an example. They will pick it up off of Twitter, and sometimes they'll translate it. But we know that there's also capabilities within our system that can work with cell phones and if they're using different languages. So that's another important part of why we're with Everbridge.
And Jim, I know you had also mentioned in previous discussions similar lines along the dialect issue of, you guys have these templates that you're working on, but you want to make sure that the dialects are perfect, so you're not sending out incorrect messaging. Maybe you're sending it in Spanish, but you could be sending it in the wrong dialect to the wrong audience, or have something written incorrectly. So you said you're in the process of getting all of that perfected and reviewed by the right people right now, so that you're reaching that community.
That is correct. And again, Sarah had a perfect example. You've got to be careful of the dialects, because you have Spanish is a language, but you have so many countries that speak Spanish, and many of those folks have taken up residence here, and you do have to be careful of the dialects. And one other thing I'm gonna throw at you right now, because I don't want to forget it, is how important it is to work with all of your schools. And we do have 12 school districts here, public. We've got over 200 schools in the county. And these folks serve children from many different countries. So they've got to take our messaging very quickly and then get the messaging out to tens of thousands of families in the right dialect. The superintendents also have decisions they've got to make rather quickly. In our state, unfortunately, we did have a high school get hit several years ago by a tornado, which resulted in the loss of life. So my hat is off to all of these school decision makers, because do you put kids on buses? Do you keep them in the schools? How do you communicate to the parents in several different languages? Do you come here and pick up your children? What's the safety of the children? So I got off track just a little bit, but I didn't want to forget about it.
Yeah, no, it's important to share. I think we have time for one more question, and kind of relates to that accessibility feature that we were just talking about. So they asked, how does the hearing impaired community receive notifications?
So, obviously with Everbridge, we have text messages that go out and text products that go out along with, some of the other notifications. And in the city of St. Louis, for the most part, we don't do a ton of calls. That's not our chosen method. Our chosen methods are more of those text products that go out through push notification, text message, the web links that can come out with, expanded information. Those are really, where we spend the bulk of our attention, and we use them for many more things. Now, when we get into tornado warnings specifically, that's when we push out the calling options that, again, have some accessibility features built in, but, are convenient to work with accessible devices and things like that. But, our tornado warnings and some of the other, great number of hazards that we have in our area do go out primarily over text products through Everbridge.
And you said there are other disability friendly devices that you all work with to make sure that messages are compatible. Say they're not hearing impaired, but they have another impairment and another way that they receive notifications. You guys make sure that you're compatible with that.
Right. A lot of times, when we're pushing the message out, I've got kind of a cheat sheet that I have usually right next to my computer, whether I'm here or at home, that kind of gives me my rundown. First is I'm putting it in Notify STL. That's going to also send it to Twitter. But sometimes I'll double down and go out on Twitter and send something specifically that'll have a graphic with it or a photo, something like that. Put my accessibility hat on, making sure that we're using alt text with any of those graphics that go along with it. And that's true too if you're putting it into your message for something, making sure that you're including a description of that, so that if somebody's using a screen reader, that it's going to capture that information and not just, kind of jump over a photo or a graphic that may have vital information in it.
Absolutely. Well, we are at time, but we really appreciate you guys taking the time to join us today, and everyone who listened for taking time out of your busy day. We hope everyone has a wonderful Tuesday, and we will get the link to this recording out as soon as we can. Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.